We're here having a chat with Francis Zhou, I get that right, and Luke Weinhagen. So, gentlemen, the reason I want to have the chat is where I live in Queensland, Australia, crime is rampant, youth crime is rampant, and I've even had past political leaders and established political leaders say it is a winning election strategy to talk about crime being out of control and doing something about it. Recently, we had a grandmother stabbed to death in front of her 6-year-old granddaughter by one member of a gang of African teenagers. And of course, with the demographics of that situation being so common, the response is often so lackluster. And so I think a lot of people, myself included, feel that relying on the institutions and the police is an insufficient strategy. And so what I really wanted to talk about, I mean, this is a long string of events that are similar like that, people getting attacked in the street, home invasions, that kind of thing. A lot of it's very petty. And so what I wanted to do is talk to you guys who know a lot about it and just offer people some practical advice on home security and security in the world, situational awareness. Really just answer the question, are people doing everything they can to be as safe as possible? And just to introduce your qualifications, Luke, for the audience, Luke is a former US Marine, situational awareness instructor, personal defense readiness instructor, defensive firearm instructor, behavioral analysis consultant, and you've also written a book putting all this into words for people called the Primal Primer. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Right. And Francis is a 10-year training and also worked up to be a coach and teacher at a premier security training institution in West Coast, US. So also knows a lot about safety and security.
I have trained quite a bit. I have not had the pleasure of using any of it yet. Whereas Luke I'm sure, used a lot of it in his former line of work. So right. I guess I represent the trained civilian who has, fortunately, not having to do a lot of this or not having to shoot anyone or defend myself, defend my life in any kind of situation. But this is where situational awareness comes in important. If you can avoid the situation, if you can spot the trap that the perp set together and avoid it in the first place, you don't have to get into a shooting situation.
I think and that's the essence of really what I wanted to talk about, because, you know, where I am, there's average people being targeted, and, you know, from the groundswell of people who care organically, you know, people are heartbroken that, you know, a 6-year-old just sees her grandmother murdered in front of her. And it's often so petty and frivolous. You know, they wanted to joyride her car. It was a Hyundai Getz, which I don't know if you have Hyundai in the US, but it's just a cheap brand. It's probably the sort of thing that you'd sell for $2,000 US. You know what I mean? Down the road, even from me, from where I am, last year, there was a home invasion where a woman was killed in her own backyard. This sort of thing is just popping up all the time. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to the chat. And I think too, Francis, with what you were saying, you're the trained civilian, you know, we might not all have so much fun under our belt as Luke. Being a Marine, maybe that's not the right word, but I bet being a Marine is fun for the most part. But yeah, we could probably aspire to be well-trained civilians like yourself, Francis. So thanks for the chat, and let's have at it.
Yeah, but just a note on that to begin with, you know, I don't know how much I would claim that security failures is valid experience or for teaching good security, right? So like, would you rather take driving lessons for somebody that's been in 600 car crashes or somebody that's never been in a car crash, right? You don't want the guy that crashes a car all the time teaching you how to drive a car. That's not who you hire to teach your kids, right? So we don't want necessarily to we don't want to discount any training when it comes to security and how you're applying security and things like that, right? That's the guy that's not getting in fights is doing it right.
Yes.
Right? He's demonstrating the effective use of security. So we don't want to minimize that at all. But that's the goal. And with everything I do with my clients, that's the goal, is to never, ever get into that violent confrontation.
Absolutely.
Right? So if I'm doing my job right, they never get there. Right. So so we lay that out there right at the beginning.
I look at use of force, right? What we're talking about here is really use of force. I look at it as a spectrum. On the one extreme end, you have knife and gun lethal weapon responses. And then on one end, the other end of the extreme is just your own presence. If you do the presence correctly, if you give verbal commands, and I don't know the laws in Australia, in the US, it's illegal. It's actually considered a lower use of force to spray someone with a pepper spray. And all of these use of force is to really modify behavior. And if you can spray someone or move to the next stage, punch them in the face and so on, and not getting to this lethal confrontation, that's considered a win. And even better, if your presence itself deters criminal victimization. Because when we look at these crime that reported in the news and so on, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that probably 95 to 99% of it is criminal victimization. They're just essentially predators picking on the weak. So if you can boost up your presence and not appear to them as a predator, these criminals will not even start their act. They can spot you from half a block away, realize that you're not their usual prey, and they will move away.
So don't look like
they're not even going to engage. Right. If someone, we see a lot of them in modern society these days, somebody walking around with one of these headphones, just totally immersing their phone, heads down. Because when you look at the side profile, right, if I'm walking like this with my head down, instead of engaging with my predator eyes, that I'm signaling to people that I'm prey, I'm not a predator. The whole reason why humans have these binocular vision, and when you look at all the predator animals that have these binocular vision, it signifies that we're predators, we're not prey. But if you don't have that binocular vision, if you're not looking someone in the eye, then that gives out a certain kind of signal as well.
So you would say in whatever way you can signal or back it up in real life, raise the cost of picking on you.
Exactly.
Because everything's going to be a cost-benefit analysis for
exactly. These criminals, they're going to be looking. They're doing this calculation in their head all the time, and just the more career criminal, they do it on an intuitive basis. Somebody actually did this experiment in the U.S. prison. They videotaped just people on the street, how they walk, how they behave, without them saying anything. And they showed it to the career criminals in lockup. And then they asked them, would you pick on this person? So the criminals will go through these videos and say, yeah, I will, criminalize this person, I'll rob them or something. And then in 2 cases, they say, nope, there's no way I'm going near those person. One of them, a lady in miniskirt, looks very sexy. So you would think that typically, your average perp would go for it, right? And then another person, a middle-aged man in glasses with a hunchback, and so on. For whatever reason, that even the criminals cannot voice themselves. They say, no way I'm going to pick on those person. Well, it turns out that the lady was a cop and have had many confrontations and have probably shot a criminal in her line of duty. The hunchback white male with eyeglasses, he used to be MACV-SOC, so basically special operations in Vietnam. These people give off a different kind of vibe that your average predators can smell and can just intuitively sense from a long way off. The dumb ones are the new ones, like the young ones, without experience, they can't spot this kind of differences, and they will just pick on anyone. But usually they also end up in jail pretty quickly for picking on the wrong guy.
What's heartbreaking in that? Sorry, I was just going to say, but it's heartbreaking in the case of where I live is that the target was a grandma. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
maybe one of the benefits that we have in our favor on being on the good guy side of this equation is that human beings are very consistent, right? We all like to think that we're very special and we're very unique and things like that, but our behaviors are all motivated by the same underlying structures, right? We have to find food, shelter, water. We have the same needs. So our behavior, our physiology responds to those needs in the same way, right? We all get hungry. We all sweat when we're hot. We all, there's physiological signs that emerge when we're under stress. And those are consistent across all humans everywhere that we are, right? It's not cultural or anything like that, right? They're universals. They're universal signals. And so I use a lot of those in the training I do with people. There's some universals that we're talking about here. The criminal, the attacker, they're generally looking for three things, right? When they initiate their attack, they're looking for your body, your money or resources, or your life, right? They're looking for those three things consistently, right? They're looking for one of those three things. Now, at the same time, the criminal attacker, they're responding to their own needs. They have three things that they don't want to have happen, right? They don't want their attack to take too long. They don't want to get hurt in their attack, and they don't want to get caught, right? So those are kind of the three universal levers that we have to pull when it comes to any kind of violence anywhere, whether we're talking about at home or out in the world, right? So what we want to be looking at is what can we do to put our hands on those three levers? What can we do to make it, a potential attack take longer? What can we do to make a potential attacker get hurt? What can we do to make a potential attacker get caught, right? Do we have the security systems and stuff like that? Are we being aware? Am I signaling that my body is readily available? Am I signaling that my resources are readily available? Am I at a lot of people don't use them anymore, but am I at the cash machine not paying attention to what's going on around me? I'm signaling that my resources are ready for the taking. Right? Or am I signaling that my life is easy to take? That's the kind of stuff that Francis is talking about here. When you're talking about your presence, right? And the downside, the unfortunate piece of this is that all of us actually have this presence, right? We evolved in very hostile, very dangerous environments. That presence is very natural to us. It's an automatic response to any kind of threat in our environment is to step into that presence. What we've done as we've socialized is we've conditioned ourselves to suppress that frame, that stance, that presence in our communities and in our daily lives. That's why we only see it commonly with people that have removed that conditioning or gone through a process to train themselves out of that conditioning. So like a lot of the work that I do is exposing people to practice to decondition the suppression of that framing, right? So it just changes how you stand in a space, right? But it's not that you have to become an operator to get into that, to build that presence. It's not that you have to become the police officer to build that presence. You don't have to be the martial arts expert or the gun pro or anything like that to get there. It is natural for humans to be in that I'm dangerous state. So
it's funny though, like you said, it has been conditioned out of people, and we live in these very strange times where should you present and signal in such a way that you are a threat if challenged?
So again, we're talking about a spectrum here.
Yeah, I'm just going to say that we often run afoul of our institutions now.
Yeah, but there's a middle ground, and this is the point I'm trying to make. So let's say on one end, this is your fresh off of training Marine or been to Fallujah or whatnot and ready to kick down a door and shoot a bunch of people. In fact, one of our instructors, well, I was going to use someone closer, but one of our instructors was a Marine and was a drill surgeon. After he got out of Marines, he was when he was in the Marines, he was on the nuclear asset retrieval team. These are people that they'll let loose in case a nuclear asset got lost, and they're going to just plow through everything in order to get their hands on the asset, right? We're talking about nuke missing. And then after he got out of Marines, he became a SWAT officer in one of the local counties and taught our classes. So just by him in the room, I can tell that he gives off a pretty aggressive vibe without going 120% going to aggressive. Let's say on the other end, you have your very submissive person. Where we want to be is actually somewhere in the middle. It's called assertive. You're not in a submissive. You're also not, well, hopefully YouTube doesn't beep this, or you're also not eye fucking somebody, right? So you want to be somewhere in the middle and maybe a tad bit on the slightly more aggressive side, just so that you don't regress on the submissive side. The over socialization tend to move us to the left side and more submissive, because we all want to appear as cooperative. We all want to not appear as predators, but maybe we've taken that a little too far. So that's why I'm saying if you need to err, then err a little bit more on the assertive / aggressive side. And then you're probably, given modern society, you're probably just in the right dial.
Sure. So what exactly does that consist of? To bring this energy to a room, to signal this to other people, can you describe exactly what's going on, what people might want to cultivate?
It's Jordan Peterson actually described it in his 12 Rules for Life. I forgot which chapter it is. And it's actually pretty simple. You stand up with your back straight, or even, what do you call it? Expand your chest. And also, when you do that, naturally your head is going to be a little higher. And I come from the Pacific Northwest. In Pacific Northwest, people tend to walk with their chin down a little more rather than, eyes flat. But just think about, stand up with your chest puffed up, and then with your eyes staring straight. And if you want to err, then err on having your chin a little bit higher. You don't want to do this, because if your chin is too high, you're basically giving off an aggressive signal. If you walk like that into a bar in Australia, I'm sure like somebody's going to pick a fight with you, right? But you also don't want to do the opposite, which is with your head tilt down. And if you make eye contact with someone, a lot of the days in modern world, when people immediately make eye contact, they will just look away and look down and so on. But in this case, right, to be assertive, you make eye contact with someone, you can give them a polite nod and look away instead of looking elsewhere immediately.
I've noticed that as well.
Again, it's situational.
Yeah, I've noticed that the ability to maintain a direct eye contact with somebody, it's often a status tell, especially in the dating world too. If a girl looks at you and you can look directly straight back at her for a few seconds, it's just a signal of like, yeah, we're matched. I'm not threatened by you. Whereas if you're like looking down, is very much like I'm scared. Like you said, that's a great way to just look at somebody. A second or two of eye contact says, I'm not scared of you. I'm not going to threaten you. Definitely in Australia, I've grown up knowing this as an Australian male, maintaining direct eye contact at a guy, especially in a bar. You do that for longer than maybe 2 or 3 seconds, he's going to walk up and say, what's your problem? So yeah, maybe it's a couple, and then just look off to the side. That's a great neutral zone. Not, like you said, up is kind of arrogant, down is submissive.
Right. You make eye contact and just give a polite nod and look away. Acknowledge each other's presence.
Or as
if a criminal see you do that, right, they realize that, because they're always going to try to catch you unaware. But if you acknowledge it, I see you, then they know, well, okay, at least this guy knows I'm here. Half the gig is up.
You probably have to be to think about it a lot, because you're like a walking mountain anyway. It's probably effortless for you to just signal. You're walking sideways through the doorways and things.
I have to learn that. I have to relearn all that myself.
One of the, all of those are great points. I just want to bring it back to people that are, let's say coming in here from zero, right? We talked already about, it was the hunchback guy that was picked out by the criminals in prison that they were doing that study with, right? So it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a rigid stance or anything like that creates that feeling. What we're doing, what we're trying to develop, right? All of us, because we have, we exist with each other, we create behavioral consistencies, what we call norms, right? And in my training, I call that baselines, right? So any environment is going to have a baseline. You do performances, right? Like if you're performing in front of a group, there's an expectation of how that group responds to your performance, right? And you can tell whether they're into it or not, right? They don't have to walk up to you and say, I'm enjoying this or not. You can tell whether or not the group is into it, right? You're picking up all kinds of signals from the group that you're performing in front of, right? You don't have to exchange words or anything like that. There's a lot of communication going on. We're doing that all the time in every single environment that we're in, right? And so what we want to do is develop the willingness to violate those expectations. And that's what we're talking about here with being that presence. Anything you're doing that's not, that's not egregious, but just anything like the little bit longer eye contact, the not being submissive when the expectation is everybody in the room is submissive. All of these things you're just showing a very small cue, a very small signal that you're willing to violate the baseline, the behavioral expectations of that environment. That makes you stand out. That makes you something to be, to pay attention to. That makes you a potential threat rather than a potential target, right? They're looking for someone that's going to behave exactly as they can anticipate. And you're already showing that you're not going to behave exactly as they anticipate. So it doesn't have to be real complex to do that. You just have to recognize what kind of baseline you're in and then see what can I do in this baseline to demonstrate that I'm not the crowd.
Do you think that small violations of those baseline norms, it also acts as a way of being willing to draw attention to oneself? And if you can draw other people's attention, you are much less likely to be targeted because, a criminal's not going to want to act so readily under the attention of everyone around as well. Do you think that's...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it absolutely contributes to that, right? And what we're doing is we're layering a lot of those little tiny things, those little tiny, things in our favor, right? We want to pile up as many factors in our favor as we can whenever we're in a situation where there's a potential risk, where there's a potential threat, right? We want to build a castle out of 1,000 tiny little bricks around ourselves, and all of those play a role in that, right? So the important thing is it's not one thing you do, and that's what's going to keep you safe. It's combining all of these tiny little steps that are always going on, and they're accessible to anyone. We all do them all the time, anyways. Mm-hmm. If you've ever driven a car, you're practicing situational awareness, or you're slamming into everybody around you. Right. I mean, these are things that we evolved to do. Right. So one of my biggest struggles when I first start working with people is I have to start teaching them how to stop suppressing these evolved benefits, these evolved skills, these evolved competencies that kept our ancestors alive for the entirety of human history. We don't exist without them. Yeah. Right? So I just have to convince people to stop shutting them off. Right.
Yeah, it's like
breathing, right? You guys, we all know how to breathe, right? We don't have to think about it, but we can think about it. We can hold our breath, right? Society, when it comes to being dangerous, society teaches us to hold our breath, to hold our dangerousness, right? But we don't have to. We can just let ourselves breathe, and we will automatically shift into that. I am dangerous to you if you are a threat to me. And that's what we'll give off just naturally, because that's the stance we naturally have as human beings, as apex predators on the planet. So,
yep.
Yeah, +1 on that. I think modern society has over-socialized people too much into being nice. So people have done interviews. Does anyone know who Ted Bundy is? Does the Australian audience know Ted Bundy? So Ted Bundy
is he the cult leader?
Was very famous. The what?
Was he the cult leader or the serial killer?
No, he's not the cult leader. So Ted Bundy was a serial murderer and serial rapist from the 1980s, or is it probably 1980s? He was very famous because he victimized some dozens, maybe 20 or so people. And he was actually from the Pacific Northwest, where I live in the Seattle area. And
were you a victim, Francis?
He couldn't have. What's that?
Were you a victim, Francis?
Oh, if I'm a victim, I wouldn't be talking here. And he only victimized women. So
he's a sexist as well.
Yes. Well, here's the thing. I don't know how dark do you want your coffee? So apparently all these. Yeah, I'm not going to go in there. All I can say is there are books that writes about the psychology of these serial murders. And I've had one of our instructors is a former Green Beret. And at the bequest of our chief instructor and founder at the school that I now coach and teach at, he read the serial murder book, and he later told our chief instructor, it's like, you MF, you should never have asked me to go read that book. Now I can't go to sleep without AR-15 next to my bed.
Wow.
Yes. So like, you got to remember, like, we're talking about the psychopaths here, right? The psychopaths of the Chinese civilization and the European civilization has aggressively called for 1,000 years by hanging or beheading or whatnot. I mean, to these psychopaths, you're not another human being. This is the part us ordinary citizens have to get into our head, or us, the good people need to get in their head. To them, you're not a human being. You're another thing. There are multiple psychological studies and books written about this. Do not judge them as you will judge a regular human. But I digress a little bit.
So can I just ask a question then for the psychopath? Because when you were talking about the situational awareness and the ways we can, Luke, you were talking about the 3 motivations that criminals have and the way that we can increase the costs of them getting those things. Mm-hmm. With the example that has shook us all here just a couple of weeks ago, it's I think 4 15, 16-year-old African refugees, Sudanese refugees, a 6-year-old grandmother. They basically just wanted to joyride her car. It seems so senseless. So even in a situation like that, are those motivations still at play? But they're just more, I don't know. I'm saying it seems senseless, like there's no rhyme or reason other than just senseless, chaotic, or maybe like feeling like they're higher status or something for having exerted that aggression. Is that still?
I don't know. I don't know enough about the situation. So it may be just a in the moment crime of passion kind of thing. What I want to focus on is the specific situation. So they just want to take the car for a joyride and so on. But when we look at these,
so I'm just going to say, if it's a crime of passion, but they want to joyride a car, for instance, is that still what Luke was saying? They're after your stuff. That's one of the 3 motivations. Is that?
Yeah, they're after their stuff, and her, whether she started fighting back or pushed them away or whatever, she created a situation now where she introduced the risk of you could get hurt or this is going to take too long. And so they responded and I haven't read anything about the attack rate, so I'm just
sure.
Based on how you're describing it. I would say that the knife attack was likely a response to this is taking too long. I'm just going to stab her and we're going to get out of here.
Sure. And look, right. I don't expect you to know everything about that specific because we're talking in general how.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah, just for the audience. Yeah, just for the audience. It's not about how can you survive this one scenario. It's how can you be generally as safe as you can be.
Right. Yeah.
Across all scenarios.
Well, I think it starts with situational awareness, right? Yeah. So these 4 teens, they have to be able to get close to her in order to victimize her. Was she at a grocery store? Was she at gas filling up petrol in her car? Was she in the car? Was the engine on? Was she putting groceries in the car?
She was at a popular supermarket.
So she's probably either getting out or she's loading grocery into her car.
Sure.
Right. Like think the act of loading grocery into your trunk and so on, it's one of those actions that naturally signals prey behavior, because think about it. If I need to put grocery in my car, I'm going to be looking in the trunk, which means my head is going to be down. And that naturally, unless I'm really alert and paying attention to what's around me, that act alone can trigger certain predatory behavior. So one of the courses that we teach at our school is called Street Vehicle Tactics. And it's all about tactical situations around the vehicle as well as in, say, room clearing situations, right? One thing that we practice is when we approach the car, how do you approach a car in such a way that you can see 360? Normally people, if I tell them, practice your situational awareness and be aware of what's around you 360 degrees, they're just going to look back. But here's the problem. If you do that, it also gives a kind of prey response, because that's what prey do, is they look all over the place. Instead, what we teach people to do is you approach the car, let's say, don't go beeline to your car. Instead, walk the next aisle. And then by the time you get to maybe parallel with your car, right, make a hook, make an L hook. So as you make that L hook, because our vision is a little bit greater than 180 degree, as you make that L hook, you get to see what's behind you and all around your car. And notice if there are any unsavory characters around. If there are, instead of getting to the car, maybe just walk away or make this action, oh, damn, I forgot something, and get back into the store.
Yeah, sure. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, so the coach I work with, the guy that I do a lot of training with personally, is a guy named Tony Blauer. He's kind of like a fear expert, but he's got this thing called the timeline of violence that I'm a big fan of, right? Because violence, when we're talking about interpersonal violence, anyways, it always follows the same pattern, right? And each stage of that pattern gives us opportunities, right? So the timeline of violence, it starts from the detect stage, and then moves on to the diffuse stage, and then moves into the defend stage, right? And every attack follows that same pattern. Sometimes it's really fast, sometimes it's really slow, right? You look at things like the school shooter that takes weeks to set up. It's still going through that same process, whereas the ambush attack, the grandmother in the parking lot, it's that same process, right? So there's opportunities, though, at each one of those stages for us in our own approach to self-defense to make decisions, to create opportunities to choose safety. And what Francis described is exactly one of those opportunities, right? And so, let's say, in Australia, there's some pretty strict controls over who can carry a firearm, right? So that limits, that restricts that defend phase of your timeline of violence, right? So, and you just have to be aware of that you have fewer options in that defend phase, which means you can't wait for the attack to start for your self-defense to begin.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You have to then lean more heavily into, do I have the ability to talk somebody down, to talk an attacker down? Can I diffuse a situation? Do I have the ability to create distance? Distance is another way to diffuse a situation, right? So we have to look at things. If we can't do the third one, if we can't do defend, right, then we have to look at the diffuse, and we have to look at the detect. We have to get really good at that situational awareness piece. Am I paying attention to what's going on around me? Am I looking at this environment as an environment that contains threats? Because all environments contain threats, right? Yep. We kind of walk around with blinders on and just pretend like we live in a safe environment. Even in our communities and in our neighborhoods and stuff like that, you could get hit by a car, right? I mean, we're on a giant rock hurtling through space. You're not safe.
Yep.
You're not safe, right? And I think that's one of the big things that people struggle with is this. There's this disconnect when they think they're scared of something bad happening, but what they're really scared of is they don't know what to do if something bad happens.
100%.
Right? And that's the big disconnect. And that's one of the things that we really have to try to work with people to get through, is to shift from that we have to make everything safe around us, because that's an impossibility. Mm-hmm. It's just the bad guy controls the attack. The bad guy always controls the attack. You don't even have a say in that. Right? They get to decide whether or not they're going to attack you or not. You're not making that decision. What you can do is develop competencies to respond to what do you do when the bad things happen, right? And that begins with acknowledging that your environment possesses or contains risks, and just being aware of that. And that doesn't mean walking around scared, but it means walking around aware. It means walking around ready and being willing to see the differences in our environments and people's behaviors. One of the conditionings that I think has been hugely detrimental to us is this notion that we have to not judge. We have to treat everybody equally. We have to, pretend like everyone is exactly the same, right? And I understand the reason for that. I understand, why they're saying those things, but it misses a huge nuance. We ought to be evaluating everybody in our environment. We ought to be evaluating the behavior of everybody in our environment all the time. But we want to be doing that against a set of expectations, a set of norms, a set of baselines, not a set of biases. And that's where the misstep occurs for people. We want to avoid those biases. Those actually hinder our ability to be situationally aware. When we start projecting our expectations, right? But when we're evaluating a whole environment against those baselines, then a group of kids dressed a certain way coming directly towards me can be recognized as a threat, no matter who that group of kids are, right? If that's a violation of the expectations in that situation, it's good for us to recognize that and respond to that and start making choices based on that potential threat in our choose safety timeline, right? If that makes sense.
It's it does. And it's very popular these days to look at the guy with a few teeth missing and face and neck tattoos and a hoodie and, tattoos on his knuckles. And then he might go on some reality TV show and he's surprise, he's a real big softie and he raises puppies or something, but back in the day, these were signals of aggression. And so I think it's for our audience, for our listeners, I think it's a good point to make. Don't play so much into the don't judge. If you judge, you're a bad person, blah, 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 propaganda. Don't discriminate unjustly. That's all fine, as you pointed out. But people do signal who they are. They do signal. You read the signals.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. We have no choice. We're all signaling all the time.
Yeah.
If you're uncomfortable in a situation, your body is going to signal that.
Yeah.
Your face is going to get red every time you're embarrassed. Your ears are going to get red when you're angry, right? Things like that. We signal all the time, and we are supposed to, and we develop the capacity to read those signals. Depending on which studies you're looking at, somewhere between 55 and 70% of all human communication is nonverbal.
Yeah.
How many classes did you guys take in elementary school or grammar school or whatever about how to read and communicate and correctly, respond to nonverbal communication? We spend years and years and years developing our ability to write and speak English, which is 30 to 40% of communication. We spend no time teaching our kids how to read the signals that we're giving off all the time, the nonverbal communication. Right, which is more of communication, tone and pitch and volume and body language and all that kind of stuff. We don't spend any time teaching that. So and all of that is part of self-defense. All that is part of how we move through our environment safely. We have to start paying attention to those things. So for me, I take a very holistic approach to self-defense. It includes all of those things. It's not do you have a gun? It's not do you know how to fight? It's can you read body language?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, because you're right. We in Australia have to rely almost exclusively on detect, diffuse, and distance, because we institutionally have barely any capacity for defense. We're not even allowed to carry pepper spray here. To give you a lesson in a story of absurdity in Queensland, where I am, there was a man who chased home invaders out of his home with an unloaded gun, and the police came and took his gun off him.
Yeah.
I'm actually lucky because we're like the cowboy state. We're the Wild West in Queensland, because I tell you what, I can still buy a pretty convincing gel blaster. But even in South, gel blaster, like paint, like little gel pellet guns.
Oh, I see.
and they're hard plastic, and they might look like an AR-15 or something. But even in Victoria, South Australia, it's a public threat because they look like a gun, so they're illegal. It's terrible. So you're right. We have to look at detect, diffuse, and distance almost exclusively.
Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier, but that also plays into your benefit when it comes to what happens after the fact. Right, you have a legal system that's going to come down hard on you if you do get into a defend yourself situation, right? Where it's the physical defense piece of that timeline of violence, right? So that means you, as a population living in those conditions, you have to get good at the earlier stages of self-defense. You have to get good at that detect and diffuse, and you have to create. That's where you guys should be spending all of your focus on developing your competencies. Is how do we get good at really reading the room? How do we get good at really recognizing what opportunities are available to me here if I feel threatened by anything? You just got to get in the habit and practice of doing those things, right? Because of that, the constraints on the third stage of defend.
Yep. So would you both say it's fair to say that, to summarize, sounds to me like the vast majority of what an average person can do is to understand signaling, understand their own signaling to the world, and understand the signaling of others if they have signals of being a threat or not. Would you say, is that fair?
It's fair, and it's accessible to everybody. You can be in a wheelchair and still do that form of self-defense.
Yep.
Right. So I mean, it's available to it's really, really accessible if you can get over that conditioning, right? If you can start deprogramming yourself to stop suppressing your evolved natural awareness of those signals.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I used your show as an example, right? Your performance as an example. You're already doing this stuff all the time. Right? I mean, we're just not looping that into our threat assessment process.
Yeah. I mean, my income depends on reading a room well.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Because I can walk into and I can walk into a room and I can look at the people I'm playing to and decide what sort of music they're going to like, and I'm right 99% of the time.
Yeah.
But I keep develops through years and years of training.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. We want to leverage our instincts as much as possible, right? Because that gives us a head start on the training. Mm-hmm. The training just makes those instincts work faster, and they give us more options on how we respond when those instincts are triggered by something, right? When we recognize a signal and our alarm goes off, the training helps us act on that alarm, right? But the first step is to stop pretending like the alarm's not going off.
Yep.
Right. Okay. You don't hit the snooze button. You don't hit the snooze button on the threat alarm.
Exactly.
Sure. You got to get out of that habit.
Yep. Yep.
Everybody has that instinct, and even that victimized grandma, she has her instincts. She had her instincts, and she probably talked herself out of it. If you just read the stories of women or victims who survive and later say, "Oh, I know there's something odd about that guy, but because
something felt off.
I was trained to be polite, I went with what they're asking anyway, and later only to regret it."
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you hear that all the time. You hear that all the time after a violent attack, after a violent encounter. Something felt off, and that's all that is. It's that they picked up on the signals, then they talked themselves out of it. Exactly as Francis was saying, and that's the conditioning I'm talking about in general. We do that. You put your kids in kindergarten. That process starts. Treat everybody the same. Don't judge. Don't read a book by a cover, and all of these things that we're doing. But we're not applying any nuance to that. Mm-hmm. We're doing all of that very irresponsibly, and we want to be doing it very responsibly. Mm-hmm. Right, this whole process, we want to be doing, judgment responsibly, not irresponsibly. And that's the difference between baselines and biases. Judging based on baselines is the responsible expression of judgment. Judging based on biases is the irresponsible, expression. But we're not making that distinction, right? And so what we're doing is we're undermining everybody's ability to be safe in their environments. And so we run into situations where grandma's getting stabbed in front of her grandchild, and that's terrible. That's a terrible cost.
It is a terrible cost. Would it be fair to say, it's the ultimate cost, really, it could only be worse if it was your children. So would it be fair to say, though, that we've developed these norms of don't judge a book by its cover, et cetera, because in the past they were cooperation signals for an in-group. And, if you've got a small tribe of people who have incentive to cooperate, then maybe that's not a bad ethos to have. But now we've extended our range of interactions with people far beyond people who might consider themselves our in-group, and so they might, like the modern world has changed a bit.
Yeah, we're maintaining We're maintaining norms across populations that don't share the norms.
Yes,
that creates a vulnerability.
Yeah,
right. And that's true no matter what the norm is, and no matter what the group is. Right. We don't have to point to any specific groups. Anytime you do that, anytime you extend your in-group norm across groups that don't share that norm, you've created a vulnerability, an exploitable vulnerability. So.
Yep. All right. Look,
I would say that it's a enlightenment idea taken too far. Right. I think so. When it comes to, think of it this way: statistics and your intuition about people of certain disposition, that's established through statistics. There's a reason why certain racial groups have a certain reputation. It's because each one of their actions have contributed to the statistics about that entire group. So based on the stereotype, right? Stereotype is actually the most accurate type of heuristics. If you have only 5 seconds to make an initial judgment about someone without getting to know them better and so on, stereotype is probably the most accurate thing you have to go with. And then let's say you sit down at a bar, you talk to them, and turns out this person missing a front tooth, full of tattoo, turns out to be a florist and actually does really good work. Great. Then, in that case, you've opened the book and you've actually read the contents and you agree with the contents.
He does raise puppies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But if you only have 5 seconds to make a deduction, well, guess what? I'm probably going to, stay away from that person based on the stereotype.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great, guys. Do you have anything to say about home security? Because that's the other issue that people here are dealing with. And I've I know a lot of people in politics, past and present, and I've had people who even live in a city, quite wealthy areas, say to me, the issue is the next winning issue in Australian politics. One of them is going to be crime. Even my neighbours in wealthy areas are getting home invasions and burgled and things like that. Right. So that's another big thing people are dealing with.
Before we move on. Before we move away from street crimes, I want to ask, are these things, these flashlights, are they illegal in Australia?
Is it just a flashlight?
Yeah, it's just a flashlight. Well, if you look closely, right, so. There's a bevel here. So guess what? Carry one of these with you.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to do this.
Yeah.
If you shine, most crimes and victimization happens in dark places. If you shine that in somebody's eyes, it gives you just the split seconds enough for you to get away. And also, I don't know about Australia, but here in the US, if I shine that, these things have like 1,000 lumens. If I shine that in somebody's eyes at night, let's say this is a criminal, the first thing they're going to think, that guy's a cop.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a very valid, non-lethal deterrent. And guess what?
Yeah.
If I need to use that as a weapon, if I just come hard on somebody's scalp with this, that's enough to dig it to the bone.
Yeah. I don't think they're illegal at all. I've got a couple of long flashlights as well, and they're very bright. Got one in my home and one in my car. And I think the people who made them were worried about durability. They wanted to provide really good value for their money. So they made them extremely durable, if you know what I mean.
There we go. Yes.
You only ever need one.
About it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I only need one. That's right.
I carry this thing with me everywhere.
Yeah.
And I'm in a foreign country now where I cannot carry my gun. I can't carry my knives. I can't even carry pepper spray. But this, they let me through airport security.
Perfect. That's great advice. Thank you.
All right, so on to home invasions.
Yeah, when it comes to home invasions, the same universals apply, right? They don't want to get hurt. They don't want it to take too long, and they don't want to get caught, right? So we're pulling on those same levers, right? So like if it's possible, all the standard things, right? The reinforced deadbolt, that's going to make it take longer. So you're increasing that. They don't want it to take too long, right? You got the dog that increases the likelihood of them getting caught. The barking dog. Mm-hmm. The security alarm system, right? That increases the likelihood of them getting caught, and things like that. It decreases the likelihood of responders coming and them getting hurt and things like that, right? So all of those same levers are in play when it comes to home security, things like that. And I think there's a lot of options that you can use there, but you just want to keep those in mind. Is the choice I'm making pulling on one of those levers? Is it creating a situation where it's taking the criminal longer to access whatever they're trying to access, or is it increasing their odds of getting caught? Things like that. Those are all going to deter the criminal from you being the victim, right?
So to summarize, that's taking too long. Don't want to get hurt. Don't want to get caught.
Correct. Yeah, those are the three big levers for the average criminal, right? If we're talking about like the terrorism approach where they don't care how long it takes, the whole point is for you to be scared, right? Then it's a little bit different dynamic. But if we're just talking about the home invasion, the criminal actor, and things like that, then those are the three big levers.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about criminal victimization, not racially fueled hatred or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Sure. And
I would say even before those three, the criminals have thousands of houses to pick. This is where the presence of your house comes in, right? Does it look like your house is easily accessible, with open windows and open doors, everyone? If let's say there are two houses next to each other. One of them, very upscale looking, open window, open veranda, open doors everywhere. It looks like it's got nice stuff in it and it's easy to pick. Another one, maybe a similar house, but it's got iron, what do you call those things? Iron gates. Looks like it's going to take a while to get there, and looks like there's nothing that's easily obtainable just by random walk by, right? There are no bicycles in the doorway, you can just walk off with it. Which one do you think the criminals are going to pick? They're also going to pick the easy one.
Yeah. So that could even be something as simple as a door's got one lock or it's got three. That's going to take more time to get through.
Right.
Yeah.
Or it's well lit, not lit. Right? Yeah. Are there places for them to hide and get, approach the house in secret and things like that? Or is it well lit coming up to the house, things like that, right? So all of those kind of things are still playing into those same
cameras
levels
around the place. Right. Like all those the ring cams and so on, the kind of cam and lights that when you approach, it's got motion detection and it lights up right away, and that it's actually recording you, right?
Yeah.
They do other than just random home burglary, which happens usually for criminalization. They will drive by, they'll case the place first and create a tag saying, hey, this looks like a pretty nice place, and we're going to go there when there's nobody inside and rob the place. Even for these criminals, remember, these criminal actors are lazy. If they're actually conscientious, then they'd be working for a living. Because why risk going to jails and so on? Now, of course, in modern Western countries, we're getting more and more liberal. Like, you can rob the place and rob a store, now going to jail and so on. And that's pretty famous in the Seattle area, unfortunately. But for the most case, there are consequences, legal consequences associated with breaking the law in most places. And so if they don't if they run the risk of getting caught or getting hurt and so on, then they're probably not going to pick the place. So in the cases where they invade the home and somebody's there, it just so happens that maybe they thought this is a good time to go and thinking that nobody's going to be there, but it turns out that somebody was, and they're just in the way.
Yeah, it's very much a path of least resistance occupation, and so your goal is to introduce resistance. Whatever you can do to introduce resistance, right? And you just want to keep that in mind in us. But it's a great point about them casing. One of the things that I advise when I'm working with neighborhoods and communities and stuff like that is, do they have a neighborhood watch? Do you know your neighbors? Do your neighbors know you? Do you guys pay attention at all to each other's behaviors and things like that? One of the things that we've talked about in the past is this idea of GSRM. Right, it comes up in other areas that we've explored together, right? And that's that gossip and shaming and rallying and ridiculing stuff. We look at those as negatives, but what I would argue is that the irresponsible expression of those as negatives. We can actually leverage those natural behaviors as well in the safety and security of our communities, right? If you're doing like a neighborhood watch, we want our neighborhoods talking about what they see going on at our house. We want them gossiping responsibly about what they see going on at our house. We want, imagine how uncomfortable it would be for the criminal casing your neighborhood when your whole neighborhood, when they saw a strange car they didn't recognize, that all the wives went and stood on the stoop and just looked. Is that criminal comfortable in that situation? No, but that's perfectly normal behavior for from the standpoint of that GSRM stuff, right? It's the same exact behavior. We can apply those and leverage those responsibly and use those as part of our how we build security in our communities, in our neighborhoods, on our street and things like that. So I'm a big fan of things like a neighborhood watch. One of the things that I like to advise the group to do is, if you can start, let's say your wife is running the thing. We'll put her in charge of your neighborhood watch group. Do a case study as a group of each person's house and invite all your neighbors to explore your yard and find out where the bad guys might get in. What are the spots? And then talk about that. So that does a couple things. It informs you where those weak spots are, and it gets your neighbors looking at those weak spots and paying attention to those weak spots. And if they see anybody from that point on, if they see anybody approaching your house through that vulnerable point, guess what they're doing?
Yep.
They're gossiping. They're getting on the phone. They're talking to you. They're going, hey, we just talked about that. And I just saw somebody go into Rob's yard through that path that we saw. It was a bad path for people to go in, and nobody should be using that path. But your whole neighborhood now is watching for that to happen. Right. And there's none of you need weapons to do that. None of you need, martial arts skills to do that. And your whole neighborhood gets enormously safer when you're leveraging each other and leveraging your innate, your innate responses to see things like that. Just pay attention to things like that and work with each other and things like that, right? And then all of you feel safer, and you're doing it together.
Yeah, it's solid advice. The Neighborhood Wives Gossip Club.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
It is fantastic.
I want to give one example of that. So I live in a suburb, right? Suburb also kind of a dead end. So you really have to work to get to that neighborhood. It's a relatively well-to-do neighborhood, upper middle class and so on. So a few months ago, our neighbors noticed, hey, somebody's bike got stolen, and then we saw some cars in the neighborhood. So we have this neighborhood watch kind of thing, and there's some cars that are just kind of lingering around on what's going on. And so one day I come home, and I noticed there's this a white two-door coupe just parked right by the mailbox. And my house is next to the mailbox, and I thought, well, that's kind of weird. What's going on there? And then 5 minutes later, still there. And so I went walking up to it, and I just keeping in mind, right, I heard that there are misidentified cars in the neighborhood and so on. And so I just took a picture of that car. And guess what? Right after I took the picture, the car took off.
Yeah.
Never to be seen.
So that's what I'm talking about. That's the casing.
Yep.
If they see that you're aware, if criminal actors see that you are aware, they're much less likely to take the place.
Yep.
And the one thing better than you being situationally aware is two of you being situationally aware. And the one thing better than two of you being situationally aware is three of you being situationally aware, right? So if you can get, imagine how excited your nosy neighbor will be to be given the job of being nosy. To be told that that's a good thing, that's a good quality. We want you doing that. Right? Yep. And we could do that to the whole neighborhood, and then everybody's engaged and involved and paying attention to, in my view, right, the safest place to be is where the bad guys are the most uncomfortable. And so the more discomfort bad guys we can create in our home, in our presence, in our home, in our street, in our neighborhood, in our community, and again, expand that out as much as we can. But as much discomfort we can cause the bad guys, the better. That's what's going to keep us. That's what's going to keep us safer. Right? We're all paying attention to our whole community becomes dangerous to the bad guys.
Yeah.
Right? Just through a few simple steps like paying attention, and I talked earlier about we have to decondition ourselves individually. We have to decondition our neighborhoods in the same way. Right? We want them noticing the strange car on the street and not just writing it off, not just dismissing it, not just being like, oh, it's okay, it's a public street, anybody can drive here. So what? Why are they driving here? Pay attention to it. See that that's a deviation from normal. Seeing that that's not the expectation. That's not someone you're usually seeing on your street, right? And we want to start paying attention to those things. We want to give each other permission to start paying attention to those things. And then we get a lot safer really fast when we start being willing to notice those things. It doesn't require any new skills. We just have to drop that resistance to noticing.
Yep.
100%.
That's solid advice. I feel like we've got so much great things, great advice for people there. Do you guys want to add anything? I'm happy.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground. I can go more on any of these, but it's all going to come down to the same things, right? Yeah. You look at what in that timeline of violence, look at what is available to you. And if any part of that is denied to you, then get really good at the other parts.
Yep.
Right. So, and like you guys, you don't have the firearm defense. You don't have, there's severe legal consequences if you choose to physically defend yourself. So get really good at noticing. Get really good at talking your way out of the bad situation or distracting them. Get really good at creating distance from the bad guys. And all that comes down to, noticing them as early as possible. So,
yeah.
And I would add 2 points to that. So as law-abiding citizens, as good guys, we're always scared of authority coming down on us, right? So even in the United States, the armed citizen, when they're in a life and death situation, the thing that's coursing through most of them will be, well, what if I hit an innocent bystander? Oh, now I'm going to be in trouble. But here's the thing. If you flip the table around, if you look at it from the other perspective, what if by you not acting, you or your loved ones ended up in the morgue? Then what kind of regret you're going to have to live with? I'd much rather act and deal with the legal consequences later and live to tell the story than being dead. I think obviously we should avoid and de-escalate and remove ourselves from the situation as much as we can. But if push comes to shove and it's that 10 seconds and the outcome determines who gets to live and walk away, I'd much rather me being the one alive. Because guess what? I am kind of selfish. I place my own life above than that of the life of the criminal actor. That's the mindset game. You have to have the right
very
mindset.
Far right there, Francis.
Today I'm only serving the coffee with more cream. I haven't gone full dark yet.
I like it.
This is going to have to be a private conversation if we have to go full dark.
Yeah. Well, a healthy animal has a will to live, and a healthy animal will defend itself. And all I'm suggesting is that we can extend what it means to defend ourselves much further out than just the attack is happening right now and I don't have a choice anymore.
Yeah.
Right. We want to think of that whole spectrum as part of our defense. And then we don't. That's also, it keeps us from stressing out about it. It's just part of how we navigate every environment. Right. Mm-hmm. We're just relaxed and ready and navigating the environment, and the potential for threats is always there, and we're aware of that, and we're paying attention to that, and we know what to do now because we're paying attention to what's going on. So you're never, once you start practicing that, you never get back into that situation of, I don't know what to do if something bad happens, because now you're just paying attention and watching for it. And so you're giving yourself the opportunity to make choices based on what happens next. So,
That's great. Luke, would you like to tell people about your book?
Sure. So my book is called The Primal Primer. It goes into a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here. It's called a primer for a reason. I wrote the book for people with no experience in any of these things, right? And it's really designed to help people begin the process of developing that skill of situational awareness, of being able to look at their environment and go, okay, what are the cues? And there's steps involved in doing that. There's different techniques that I teach in the book and in the classes that I do. But we want to begin building that process of what is the expectation of my environment, right? What should I be looking for? And then what stands out from that? And how do I start to see that? And how do I let myself start to see that? And that's really what the book is about. It's starting to, I call it the Primal Primer, and I call my business Core Human Competence, because these are evolved skills, right? You don't have to teach us how to do these things, but we need to develop our ability to use them because we've been conditioned out of them so hard, right? So that's why it's called the Primal Primer. It's a base level instruction book for how to be that human being aware in an environment again. Like every other animal in the world is aware of the threats in their environment. We should be too. It's a healthy thing to do. It's not a fear-based thing. It's just a healthy way to navigate your environment.
Mm-hmm. And if people would like to get your book or ask you more about these topics, how can they get in touch with you?
So my website is corehumancompetence.com, right? You can access me through there. You can access the book through there. The book's also available on Amazon, right? So this is what you're looking for. It's the Primal Primer. And I'm happy to work with, like if you guys do start neighborhood watches, or you already involved in neighborhood watches, I work with groups like that. So if you get into a situation where you're looking for more of this type of training specifically, I can work with groups like that. I can work with you guys on stuff like that. I'm more than happy to do those kinds of things. And so, I mean, that's what I do. I teach organizations how to do this stuff as well, right? Because violence isn't limited to the individual. Violence isn't limited to random attacks on the street. You know, we see guys coming in off the street and ripping every iPhone on the counter off the counter, right? We can see some of that kind of thing coming. Right. And it's not just applicable in the violent attack. You know, how can you recognize the signs of a customer that's about to start losing it? Can you recognize the signs of an employee that's having a bad day and is about to start losing it? Things like that. They're wildly applicable skills, and we just have to start using them. So
sounds good.
Okay,
sounds
really good. Network there for a bit.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, did you have anything you'd like to plug, Francis?
I can't think of anything right now, other than if we get into the detailed tactics of home defense and so on, which, well, one, it's hard to tell. It's hard to convey that through a Zoom meeting, because it's really something that you got to train physically and analyze a floor plan and so on. Sure. And second, well, I doubt we're going to have time to go through all the details there.
Well, I'm sure if people get in touch with Luke, they can also get in touch with you.
Yeah. And
so
if you are finding yourself struggling on how to start engaging in community, to start building, you know, this community approach to security and this community approach to safety, Francis and I are working on projects to help build community in location, right? So you can reach out to us for that as well. We can help support you in building those kind of communities that you can start leveraging in those ways. So either one of us is a resource for that as well.
Fantastic. So that was corehumancompetence.com. .com. Yeah. Great.
Yep. And I'll send you that link. You can put it in the show notes and stuff like that.
I will. Yeah. No problem.
And of course, you can find me on Twitter and places like that as well. So I'll shoot you.
I'll put your Twitters underneath as well. Yeah, that's fantastic. Really good information.
And reach out. I'm accessible. I like talking about this stuff. I want people safer. That's my whole goal with all of this stuff. And I want your audience safer, right? I'm not teaching operators here. I'm not in the military anymore. I'm teaching everybody in the neighborhood, right? Those are my audience. Those are the people I'm working with. So
that's why I wanted to have the chat. I want people safer as well.
Yeah,
because it's really getting out of hand. So great advice there for everybody. Really appreciate your time, boys.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
All right. Thank you.